Foster Power is a movement to improve the lives and futures of youth in Florida's foster care system by creating access to information on their benefits, protections, and legal rights. Foster Power is the first app of its kind nationwide and was made by lawyers with youth input. Visit fosterpower.org/app to download the free mobile app today.
Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, Senior Editor of the Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at @theimprintnews. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals of child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business policy and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the Safe Camp Audio Network. Check out our show page and all of Safe Camp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on all social media. On this week's episode, we are going to sneak in another Safe Camp Spotlight feature for our newest show. It's called The Proximity Process. It is hosted by Matt Anderson, who we've had on the Imprint Weekly Podcast before. Proximity Process is about how child welfare transformation actually starts with personal transformation. So we talked to Matt about what's coming in on the show that he's planning here, his own career in child welfare, and why a year ago he decided to leave his job to rethink his own role within the context of child welfare. Before we get to Matt, we are going to do some headlines, or rather one headline with a lot of different leads for this week, and that is the enormous slate of executive actions that the Biden administration made around child welfare, most of which was announced on Wednesday. A few were tacked on right around Friday afternoon, all of them getting in kind of at the buzzer right before what is likely to be a government shutdown that has commenced by the time you listen to this podcast. So there were three rules very directly related to different aspects of child welfare that were rolled out on Wednesday. One of them on kinship caregivers, that was a finalized rule. One on legal protections and legal counsel for parents and children. That was a proposed rule. And then another proposed rule on the foster care placements available to LGBTQI plus youth. Also, two other very big rule proposals I'll mention at the end. One pertains to unaccompanied children coming over from mostly Central American countries at the border. The other having to do with the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, which is what replaced welfare back in the mid-90s. I haven't fully dove into either of those two rules, so I'll just kind of go over a little bit of the broad strokes, and then maybe we'll go more in depth on those another time in the near future. So first, I'm going to link to our explainer on all three of these child welfare rules that we're going to talk about here in the Imprint. So if you just want to read instead of listen to me yak on about them, you can go to the show notes and find that link. But let's walk through the basics on each of these three, because they really are potentially significant, right? They're just rules at this point, but they do open up some possibilities. I'll kind of talk through a little bit of the context for each rule and then try my best to succinctly describe what exactly these proposals would do. All right, so let's start with the kinship rule, because this one is actually finalized. We've talked about what the Biden administration has been tinkering with and coming up with in this space for a while now, because, and again, I'll link to this story in our show notes as well, the Imprint's Michael Fitzgerald reported back in February on the administration's plans to do some changes to the way that the federal 4E program operates, and as it relates to relatives caring for children who have been removed into foster care. Now, kinship care is certainly nothing new. Millions and millions of grandparents and aunts and uncles and fictive kin, neighbors, family, friends have been taking care of children in this country without anybody from the government asking them to for the entire time we've been a country. We have certainly always had the ability for relatives to become licensed foster parents and take care of kids who have been taken into the foster care system. And then, as you know, has been unearthed and really brought into the forefront in the past few years, especially by Professor Josh Gupta-Kagan, reporters at my outfit, The Imprint, reporters and other outlets. There is this kind of middle ground that some people call hidden foster care, right? This is the transfer of physical custody of a kid by way of child protective services to a relative or to a family friend without changing the legal custody. So they're never really formally taken into foster care. It's just a move that is done, and the concern is that it's done often without a lot of due process or knowledge provided to both parents and the relatives who are involved in this equation. So there's, as I see it, maybe I'm editorializing here. There's two pretty big challenges in the continuity and kind of integrity of the way that kinship caregivers are supported in this country. There's certainly more than two, but two that are to me pertain to this rule quite a bit. One is that this option of diversion or hidden foster care creates a path by which, county systems, state systems don't even really need to often worry about the protocols of licensing for foster care or supporting the kinship caregivers who are stepping up and taking kids at their request. Some states don't even pay at all. Some states will pay kin in that kind of world through temporary assistance for needy families payments, like a welfare payment. That's a child only payment. So that's one issue. The other issue is that oftentimes, even when, formal foster care is the path that's going to be chosen, a person who wants to just be a foster parent goes, they get licensed, they prepare themselves, and then they wait for the call from CPS that there's a child coming. So they're somewhat ready in that sense. When it's a relative, a lot of times that knock is coming late at night. It's coming with the sort of caveat that if you don't take this kid in right now, we may put them with a stranger. And so those grandparents, kinship caregivers, they don't have much time to think about it or get ready. And very often they do not have the money to have a house that conforms to all of the different licensing standards or rules that are set out to have a licensable foster care home under most state laws. So what the Biden administration is trying to do here with this finalized rule is kind of two things. First, they're making it clear that you do not need to have the exact same standards for licensing a stranger foster home. And I know that sounds pejorative, but that's just the distinction here. You don't have to have the same exact standards and protocols for licensing a stranger foster home as you do for kinship caregivers. There can be two. Now, it doesn't set forth a second path, though by the time you hear this podcast, if you're listening to it the week it comes out, there is a group who have been working on sort of a model standard for how you would go about approving or licensing kinship caregiver homes. That would be different than the kind of traditional stuff that goes into foster homes. And so if that comes out in time for me to link it on the show notes, I will do that. I suspect it won't, so we may have to follow up and let people know about that either at the Imprint website or on the podcast in a subsequent week. So that's the first thing, is just laying out that you can have different standards to license kinship caregivers that are different than your other foster homes. And then the second part is making clear that under federal law, anybody that is approved as a kinship home, and that's whether it's in the new path or the old path, is eligible for federal foster care payments. So you can, as a state or a county, go and seek reimbursement to get supported for paying these relatives to take care of their kin. And the money for that is, I reference it as paying. These are maintenance payments to help with the sizable cost of raising kids ranging from 0 to 18 years old in America right now. When we reported on this proposed rule back in February, when it was a proposed rule, now this has been finalized here, Mark Testa, who is one of the most respected researchers on child welfare, and in particular on kinship support within child welfare, called this proposed plan, and I'm quoting him here, the most important advance the federal government has made in kinship care policy in the last 40 years. And the administration, in finalizing this rule here, is projecting that this is going to add $3 billion over a 10-year period to the amount of foster care payments that are made through the Title IV-E program, which pays for foster care maintenance payments. It's also now the conduit for the family under the Family First Act for certain prevention services aimed at preventing foster care placements and adoption subsidies. And so they are projecting, the administration, that, the $3 billion increase is going to come because they believe there'll be an increase in the percentage of kinship placements covered by 4E from 28% right now to 42%. So that's quite a big leap. And this is not to throw cold water on anything. This is just basically an offer to states. It is making clear you don't need to license kin and foster families the same. You can pay kin through the 4E program who are approved or licensed. You don't have to go through the formal thing that you do with foster families. But it's really up to the states whether they want to avail themselves of this, right? Which is not a done deal in every state. There's an obvious financial incentive to maintaining your kinship care program as something that's pretty diversionary, because nobody's asking you necessarily or putting any rules in place on how much you have to pay or support those kin or what you're doing to ensure safety or licensing or approval of them. So I know there was a lot of work to advocate for this rule. And I think that the next step is going to be a big push and campaign around working with states and talking them into and convincing them of the value of increasing the formal inclusion of relatives when a child is deemed to be necessarily removed from their home. Okay, so that's the kinship caregiver rule. By the way, I think we're going to go more in depth on these at the imprint and in the podcast as well in the coming week. So we'll have some experts on. So it's not just me telling you about these. We can get into some nitty gritty on each one of these. Maybe we'll do a week on each or something. I don't know. So the next rule, this is a proposed rule. It is around legal representation for parents who are accused by CPS and children who are in foster care. Now, a little bit of context here. During the Trump administration, the child welfare team there very quietly changed the child welfare policy manual. This really wasn't even done through rulemaking or anything like that, to make clear that the administrative aspect of Title 4E, so we talked about the foster care payments, adoption subsidies, and things like that. There's sort of an administrative part of 4E that states can get a 50-50 split on certain aspects of just carrying out child welfare services. Now, in the past, 4E admin has only been available to states to pay for its lawyers, for child welfare agencies' lawyers to appear in court, to represent the agencies, represent the system. What the Trump team did was make clear in this policy manual that no, that is not the only use of it. You can also use 4E admin to help pay for parents' lawyers and for children's lawyers. And that is a pretty significant thing, because this is under the, constitutionally, there's not a right to an attorney for parents in child welfare cases in dependency court. Most states now require some provision of indigent defense for parents, but it's not really always at the same time. Some states provide an attorney as a parent might be facing the removal of a child. Some won't do it until you're facing a termination of your parental rights. With children, it's a little even more murky. There's, I think, a dozen states or something like that don't really require any form of counsel for kids. So this is obviously important territory of child welfare, with pretty murky rules around when do you get a lawyer and who's going to pay for it. And when you don't have a lot of money going towards that, you're pretty much going to get what you pay for and have, fairly crappy, overextended, overburdened lawyering. I don't say that lawyers are crappy, but when you have, a million clients and you meet them right before the case, and it's not quality legal representation with no social workers to help the clients or anything like that, you're going to get what you pay for. So that was an attempt by, some pretty good child welfare leaders at the Trump administration trying to open up the federal tap to help states pay for better legal counsel and protections for both parents and children. So this proposed rule at its base takes that and sort of codifies it. So, which I think is significant, because I remember covering that rule change or that policy change at the time. And there were, frankly, people who were really excited about it, who were scared we were reporting on it because they were afraid somebody was going to just notice and quickly change it back and say, well, that was a bad idea, no new spending, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little harder, though very possible, to kind of like totally roll back a rule that's already been finalized. So this would be bringing that out a little bit more into the formal regulations of child welfare policy at the federal level. But it definitely goes beyond that in a very significant way that is generally referred to as pre-petition legal counsel. So what that means is, as I mentioned, most parents are going to get a lawyer sometime around when they've been accused of abuse and neglect and are have either lost their child already, the child's already in foster care, or they're going to a hearing at which they could lose their child. What this proposed rule is trying to also include as available, legal services that can be paid for in part with this 4E federal dollars are, legal support for parents or for youth in foster care where the services, where something has come up that could lead to child welfare involvement or deeper child welfare involvement, in particular, the removal of a child. So this is, as we say, pre-petition. The petition in question there, or that it references, is the petition to remove a child. So pre-petition legal support means working with a parent, working within the court system to try and mitigate situations that, left unaddressed, they could lead to this foster care removal. Here are just a few of the things that would kind of fall into that bucket. A parent or parents who need help with housing, right? They're facing eviction. They've lost their home already. They're sleeping in a car with their kids. They're freaked out that if a police officer rolls by and sees them sleeping with their kid, they're going to lose them to foster care. And that's a very real fear because that could definitely happen. Paternity tests regarding the paternity of the identity of the father in cases, which comes up. Getting an order of protection against a violent partner whose presence is the issue that might lead to foster care. Legal proceedings around access to, child education records for youth in foster care. Assistance securing housing as they face the prospect of aging out. In particular, for youth who are pregnant or parenting, and there are a lot of those in foster care, securing that housing might be the difference between losing their own child. And we all know about the really devastating generational trend in child welfare involvement. One little interesting note from this proposed rule that I thought was pretty wild was the administration noted that they had considered making the provision of legal counsel for parents and children essentially mandatory through this rulemaking process. And I'm going to quote from the explanation here, their view ultimately was that the Title 4E program, quote, does not provide authority to require agencies to provide such representation or to claim for administrative costs. So they were sort of, I was kind of reading between the tea leaves as them saying, we wish that this was written in such a way where we could make you provide attorneys for everybody, but we don't think we can. It's sort of like a suggestion to Congress that this administration would support such a change in law as to require that. And that actually was bandied about, not as part of 4E, but there's a kind of a reauthorization on the table, or a process going on to reauthorize the CAPTA, which is the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. And, recent iterations of the bill that would reauthorize that had included a requirement to provide legal counsel for both children and parents who are involved in the system. All right, so that was the legal protections proposed rule. The other proposed rule is around the availability of safe placements for youth who identify as, they use the term LGBTQI plus in the rule, generally to refer to those young people with a different sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. And the intent of this proposed rule is to require that state child welfare agencies implement what they're referred to here in the rule as specific processes and requirements to ensure that these youth have safe and appropriate foster homes or other placements. And that is the term that is repetitively used within this proposed rule, safe and appropriate. Now, what does that mean? It is described as an environment, and I'm quoting here, environment free of hostility, mistreatment, or abuse based on the child's LGBTQI plus status. The provider of safe and appropriate options must, and here it appears to be more focused on like the government or the private entity that manages a foster home or a residential care, as opposed to like the individual home. But the safe and appropriate options must route youth to supportive resources. Okay, so one challenge in kind of implementing this, if it becomes finalized, is that, kids don't walk around with their status printed on a badge all the time. It's not always obvious. Very rarely probably is. So what they do within this proposed rule is kind of to tackle this is, first, a state would be required to provide a safe and appropriate place for any youth who proactively requests it, who steps up to them and says, I am a certain status, or tell them something about themselves, they have to go and secure a safe and appropriate placement for them. And then more broadly, this requires that systems notify all children 14 or older of the availability of the safe placements. I didn't read anything that says they couldn't start to provide that awareness at a younger age, but it does require it for any child who is 14 or over. They stop short of requiring every foster care provider, and by that I mean like every nonprofit or for-profit company that manages foster homes or residential care. It does not require all of them to offer safe and appropriate placements. Instead, what it does is requires an in totality concept at a state level, basically by saying that a state child welfare system must ensure that in totality across the state, there are enough safe and appropriate placements for the number of LGBTQI youth in their care. So to sum those all up, kinship care, states can have a different path to licensing or approving relative caregivers. They can also pay those caregivers or compensate them through the 4E child welfare entitlement. States are already able to tap into the 4E funds to pay for lawyers for kids and for parents. Now that will, under this proposed rule, kind of be codified into the regs, but also expanded to include what is kind of referred to as pre-petition legal work on things like housing, evictions, domestic violence issues, orders of protection, things like that. And then each state is going to, under these proposed rules, have to have a reasonable supply of safe and appropriate placements for LGBTQI plus youth, and ensure that those placements are announced or provided to youth who ask for them, and also that older teenagers 14 and up, are all made aware of their availability. So the other two proposals that I mentioned at the top of this, one is about the unaccompanied children's program, and this is basically, I'm not going to go into the whole wind up because we can tackle this on another episode. Basically, when a minor who is not from Mexico arrives at the southern border, often from Central American countries, it really triggers kind of the only truly national foster care system we have. So Border Patrol might apprehend that youth. They would likely seek asylum. They would then be transferred into the custody of the Department of Health and Human Services, likely put in a shelter at first. The process is for them to then be placed as quickly as possible with a sponsor in the country. That might end up being a parent who's already here or a relative who's already here, and then they go through the asylum process for here. So I haven't gone through this rule in its entirety yet. It's pretty lengthy. It does look like there is the assurance in here or new requirements around providing at least some level of legal counsel to youth who are seeking asylum and coming across, really making them aware of their options in the asylum process. So stay tuned on that. We'll dig deeper into it. And then the other one is some clarifying language and regulation around the temporary assistance for needy families program. And again, haven't read through it all. I did kind of scan it for how it references child welfare, and it does look to me like they are looking to crack down on the extent to which some states use this money to pay for child welfare. Like, some states really don't take their allocation of TANF money. TANF is temporary assistance for needy families. Some states don't use any of it related to child welfare, or they might only use it to pay for kinship caregivers, right? Like we talked about at the first rule here, who don't go through the formal foster care system. They're not formal foster parents, but they are taking care of a kid at the request of CPS. They may get what's called like a child-only TANF payment. What it seems like they're doing in this rule is not necessarily saying that those are inappropriate payments, but if you're paying for services that keep a kid out of their family, whether it's residential care or foster care, that's not going to be allowed anymore under TANF. So if you're using TANF for child welfare services, you're going to have to be using it for kinship care, for reunification with a parent, so reunification services, or you're going to have to be using it for services that are rendered while a child is still living with a parent. So it can't be used for foster care. It can't be used to keep a family apart. That would be, in the opinion of this administration, by this rule, proposed rule, kind of a running afoul of the expectations of the temporary assistance for needy families program. So again, More on those in the coming weeks, and we'll get some experts on here to really tell you some more about the nitty gritty as it relates to these 3 child welfare, kind of direct proposed rules and finalized rules. All right, when we come back, my conversation with Matt Anderson, host of the forthcoming podcast, The Proximity Process. Join Fostering Media Connections on Thursday, October 12th for Education Inside and Out, an online conversation about what we know and what we're trying when it comes to educating youth who experience incarceration. This great panel is going to tell you about brand new research around education and juvenile justice. You'll hear from pioneers working with teachers on ways to engage and inspire students in juvenile facilities. And we'll learn about a recent movement in California to get incarcerated youth and young adults on the college track. Join us on Thursday, October 12th, 1 p.m. Pacific Time, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. This event is completely free thanks to our sponsor, the California Wellness Foundation. To register, just visit the link in the show notes on this episode or visit imprintnews.org/webinars. All right, time for another Safe Camp Spotlight interview. All summer, we have been bringing in hosts from Safe Camp's inaugural group of member podcasts. You can check out all these podcasts at safecampaudio.org. And we are regularly promoting and featuring their work on social media. You can follow us on any of the big ones at Safe Camp Audio. Today, we have the latest addition to the Safe Camp Audio family, Matt Anderson, host of the forthcoming podcast, The Proximity Process, which is just a piece of the new company he has started called Proximity Design Studio. So we'll talk about all that. Matt, thanks for joining us on the Imprint Weekly podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's exciting to be introduced in that way. There's a first for you. So thanks.
Yeah. And actually, welcome back, I guess I should say, because we had you on a while back. But that doesn't get you out of the first question. You got to give me one of your favorites, as all guests do. Book, TV show, movie, musical group, or sports team. I went back and checked. Last answer was Pittsburgh Steelers. So you got to give me something else. Steelers, we know. What else is Matt's favorite?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a book, but then can I pivot to a quick curveball around kind of sports pop culture stuff?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the book is The Obstacle is the Way. This is one of my favorite books, so I definitely recommend it, and grounded in Stoic philosophy, among other things. And then, the spin on the question is not a sports team, but a sports event, the X Games.
Okay.
So I grew up a skateboarder and a snowboarder, and the X Games hadn't started yet when I was getting started in those two sports. So I had this dream.
Aging himself in real time here.
Yeah, exactly.
I am the same way.
But I look young, so it's good. But yeah, no. So the X Games kind of popped when I was young and skateboarding and snowboarding. And so I had this dream of being in the X Games, and then I had this dream of being in the first Olympics competing as a snowboarder. And so those were some early childhood dreams that I had, and did not achieve those. I did not make the Olympics as a snowboarder, but I do still skateboard and snowboard this late in life. So
I think one of my biggest regrets as like a kid when I look back is that I really loved playing team sports. I don't regret that, but I kind of regret not having that ambition, like even if it was obviously not going to happen, to do something with like snowboarding or whatever, because like it's just eminently easier to do a solo sport when you get to our age. Not to put you in my group, but that's a great poll, man. No one said X Games yet. I suspect you might agree. I think Shaun White is probably the greatest athlete of the modern time, maybe the last 40 years of the U.S. We kind of don't think of him in the same vein as Michael Jordan and those guys, but I mean, dude's won how many gold medals at the Olympics and X Games?
Most
you
of
can't
them.
even count. Yeah, most of them. And Chloe Kim
during his run.
I love Chloe Kim too.
Yeah, Chloe Kim's amazing. So she's still at it. I think Shaun's pretty much done.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think during his run, like, Tiger Woods had that 10-year run where he was pretty much unbeatable. Shaun White did more than Tiger Woods did more than Michael Jordan did. Like the run was longer and the wins were more. So yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
A lot of wins. Have you ever seen the documentary Rising Sun about the skateboarder Christian Hosoi?
I know who Christian Hosoi is, but I don't think I've seen it.
I recommend it if you're into skateboarding, or really, actually, this is a weird tangent, but I would say into like thinking about how how important adults are in the lives of kids, because
Mm,
this is just a short version. Go see it, Rising Sun, or rent it. This is a kid who was going to be what like Tony Hawk and Shaun White became. He was
yeah.
a phenom
Yeah.
from like the age of 8,
Mm,
left to sort of raise himself and mix in
mm,
celebrity and the fact that he's hanging out with like the Red Hot Chili Peppers and skateboarding it all night times a night.
mm.
He went through some stuff. I think he came out all right on the other side, so it's okay to say that. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, really cool stuff. All right, so last time we had you on, Matt, you were with the Children's Home Society of North Carolina. You spent more than a decade there, and built in the last 2 years, I think, their Institute for Family as kind of a hub
Mhm.
for working around how can we prevent child welfare environment involvement. So
Right.
you launched a great podcast then, Seen Out Loud. We've featured
Yeah.
it on this stream before. What made you decide to kind of branch off on your own here instead of just build more of a media presence that you had started at
Mhm.
the Institute for Family?
It's a big question. That would be its own episode for us to really get into the nuances and ins and out of that. And I know we're going to talk about the new podcast I'm working on, the proximity process. The first episode's going to get pretty deep into my personal story of sort of the progression of my career and how I came to that decision to leave my role at the Children's Home Society and the Institute. So that'll go deeper. But I've been in my career now 20 years, and I've always really been grounded in my first experience of working with kids aging out of foster care and seeing how we failed in a promise to do right by those kids. And I decided to one, never look away from the experience those kids had and what they taught me, but also to always be focused on like, how do we constantly get better as people, get better as professionals, get better as a system, to be right with the people that we serve. And that's always been sort of a North Star for me. And sort of long story short, when I was working at Children's Home Society, I mean, great organization, great people. I was there for 11 years, left on good terms. But for me personally, I came to a place where my values were not aligned with the work that I was doing. And, one way to describe that is that I was responsible for North Carolina's largest foster care program. And I was building the Institute around how do we prevent the need for foster care. And those things actually are in contradiction of each other. And, I couldn't hold those two things together and feel whole. Like, integrity is important to me, and being true to the people that I serve is important to me. And so if I'm in service of parents whose kids are in my foster care program, I didn't feel like I was right with those parents. And I didn't feel like I was right with myself. And I felt like I was, sort of being split in terms of my values and the work that I was doing. And so I came to a place where I just had to stop. I didn't know exactly what was going to be next, but I knew that that wasn't the right place for me to be anymore. And so, I decided that it was best for me and best for the organization for me to step away and figure out what was next. Yeah.
Is that because you feel like the provision of foster care in North Carolina in general is flawed and built in a flawed way, or
Mhm.
that you simply do not believe in the solution of foster care as part of a bigger context? Or is that something you struggle with in general?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question, but I
Yeah.
think that I don't believe in the provision of foster care as a solution to the fundamental root cause issues that families are facing all over the country. And I
Mhm.
think the problem that we're dealing with is that these root cause issues of, underinvestment for generations in communities, and then over surveillance of communities for generations, has caused all kinds of issues. And the child welfare focus on child safety, I think, takes us too far down the path of one, family separation, and that causes harm. Like, there's no way around the reality that foster care as an intervention does harm to people. I'm a social worker. Our first code of ethic is to do no harm. Well, if we're operating in a system that's doing harm, then I'm doing harm as a social worker. And that was part of the process that I went through to realize that in my role, I'm doing harm to people. And so I think this focus on child safety has sent us too far down a path. And from my experience as a leader in the system, parents of those children became invisible, literally and figuratively, just invisible to me and to us. But if we're here to take care of kids and we're concerned about their safety and well-being, then I came to a place that we have to demonstrate our care for kids and how we invest in the well-being of parents, how we see parents. And I just don't think the child welfare system is doing that right now. And so I wanted to be able to be, free of the constraints of, if I run a foster care program, I have to be all in, integrity, right? Like integrity is to be whole in who you are. And I wasn't all in anymore. And so it wasn't good for me. It wasn't good for my coworkers. It wasn't good for the organization. I had to let go and sort of see what my what my path forward was going to be. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, I said a lot there, John, but that's, so I grapple with this stuff quite a bit, but I think there's some fundamental issues, that our child welfare system really has to grapple with, that we as individuals really have to grapple with.
So the proximity process is the podcast. Describe it in 3 sentences or less for people.
Okay. Yeah. So this is a good transition. So the proximity process, is a show about how systems transformation actually starts with personal transformation, which is really what I was just describing. Like, I started to give you some insights into my own process. So another sentence to describe it, a lot of us are really focused on child welfare systems reform, changing the child welfare system. And that change actually starts with us, systems leaders, right? So it's an inside out job. And so the show is in part semi-autobiographical. So it's documenting, and I'm sharing my own process of how I'm transforming myself in this work. And then I'll bring on guests to have conversations with them about their process and about the insights and learnings that they have to share with an audience. And then the last thing I would say about it is that I really want every episode of the podcast to be an invitation to my audience to join in the conversation, to join in this community that's growing around this work and even around the work that I'm doing personally, and to just go deeper into their own process.
All right, that might have been 4 sentences, but I'm going to let you go on that because I think one of them was just kind of getting in your groove. So that's good. Okay. Let's talk about your motivations, your kind of inspiration in this space, right? So you talked about your kind of career as a social worker.
Yeah.
What's your favorite podcast overall, and what's your favorite other show in the youth and family space? I guess what I'm looking for there is kind of like what inspires you, in this space. Mm-hmm. But what have you learned from?
Yeah. So there's a lot of podcasts that I listen to and love, of course. The one that I've been listening to almost every day for years now is the Gary V audio experience. So this is Gary Vaynerchuk. So he's coming from the business world and the digital marketing world, but he's coming at it from a place of emotional intelligence and being grounded in core values like kindness and compassion and love and patience and ambition. But his podcast is great because mindset really matters. The Obstacle is the Way, as a book that I shared at the beginning here. The Obstacle is the Way is really a lot about perception, how we perceive the world, which is really grounded in our mindset. So his podcast brings positivity, optimism, but also all kinds of imagination and creativity and ideas and different kinds of people that are looking at the world in different ways. And so like every day I just get to take in a lot of really good energy, but a lot of good ideas and practical tips and just all. So it's a really diverse podcast, but anyway, I love it.
Nice.
Oh, and then in the youth and family services space.
Yeah.
I would say so as a social worker, media production, storytelling has been a through line over the last 20 years. So narrative change and storytelling, I think, is really important in our field. And so the Unbelievably Resilient podcast is all about that. So that's at the top of my list right now because they believe in narrative change, but also everybody that's in that organization and running that podcast has all been in the system. And so they're coming at it from their firsthand experience, and they're bringing their own personal expertise and professional expertise to how we see the system and how we see people in the system, how we see ourselves in the system. So it's a good one.
So I've been asking people to avoid the process of picking a favorite, which episode of their show, stands out as kind of an embodiment of what they're trying to do with it. Obviously I can't ask you that yet.
Yeah.
Because you're about to release it. It's coming out soon here. But maybe you want to tease a few,
Sure.
early guests, and if you'd like to look back on, you do have a podcast career. You did Seen Out Loud. It was a tremendous show. So if you want to kind of reminisce on one that stands out, that might be in line with what you're trying to do with this show, go for it.
Yeah, sure. So we are in production right now of multiple episodes getting ready to release. So, episode 1 is going to be my own personal story and my own proximity process. So you're going to get a lot of insights into what that looks like for me. We have Corey Best coming on, Sarah Winograd, and then I'm recording today actually with Ryan O'Donnell, which is somebody that nobody will know in the child welfare space. So he's coming at this from a very different perspective. My hope is that in every episode, we're able to do a couple things. One, I want people to get sort of like depth of insight into what this proximity process is. So for me, it's a process of seeing and reckoning and reconciling. And this is the process that I've been going through, seeing the system for what it is, seeing myself as somebody that is contributing and perpetuating a system that in often cases is doing harm to people, and then reckoning, taking account, being accountable for my participation, my contributions, for things that are not in service of people within the context of our system. And then reconciling, taking action. What am I going to do? How am I going to contribute to equity, justice, liberation, really better outcomes for kids, families, communities? So that's kind of the process as I'm kind of creating it on my own path, this seeing, reckoning, reconciling. And I hope that we tease out how people can go through their own process in these episodes. And I end every episode with a question of, what does proximity mean to you? You know this, John. I mean, the child welfare field is going through this reemergence around lived experience or lived expertise. We have to have lived expertise at the table. That's good, but there's layers of depth to what proximity in that context really is all about. And so we get into that in these episodes. And I think that's important right now. I think we really have to be thoughtful about what it means to engage with communities and engage with people that have been impacted with systems. And, anyway, we could go deep into that. So anyway, that will come in the episode. And then, I think that there are, Seen Out Loud had some really, really great episodes that get really deep into people's experiences of the system, and then sort of like what their wisdom and insights are and how they're applying their wisdom and insights to helping other people. There are a lot of episodes like that. Shronda, Slam and Lily, Jaquaya. I mean, the list goes on. But I think for this new show, Sarah Winograd is a guest on Seen Out Loud, and she'll show up in the proximity process. And I think that episode with her on Seen Out Loud shows the personal transformation. So the proximity process is about systems transformation, actually starts with personal transformation. We have to change, right? And I could get into what that means and will in the show. But Sarah went through her own personal transformation, and then really like seeing, reckoning, reconciling the actions that she's been taking throughout her career are really, really powerful and instructive. So that episode, and then we did an episode with Brett and Jessica Crisp on Seen Out Loud, 2 foster parents. Came into being foster parents to build their family through adoption. That was their goal. That was their dream. They went through their own personal transformation of seeing, reckoning, and reconciling. And at the end, they realized their dream was to be in relationship with the family whose little girl was placed with them and be in deep relationship with them, help her go home to her mom, which happened. And now we are probably 4 years out from that reunification, and they are no longer foster parents, and they're still in relationship. They're family, right? So the Crisps are now part of this mom's and this little girl's family, and they see each other all the time. That's personal transformation.
All right, the proximity process coming very soon after you hear this interview with Matt. Check it out on Safe Camp Audio Network. Matt Anderson, thank you for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks to Matt Anderson, host of The Proximity Process, for joining us this week on the Imprint Weekly Podcast. Check for his show. It's again called The Proximity Process, wherever you download podcasts or on the Safe Camp Audio website. And thank you to Foster Power, a movement to improve the lives and futures of youth in foster care by creating access to information on their benefits, protections, and legal rights, for sponsoring this episode of the Imprint Weekly Podcast. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Onjoko, with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elia. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you'd support our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, very easy. Just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @TheImprintNews and visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. You can always email us at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we will see you next week.